Please subscribe and hit the like button.
There you go. There's our shofar. This past week was a celebration of Towrah. It's interesting, of course, that even though it was a celebration of Towrah, if you pay attention to what's going on in Israel, and for that, I would recommend the Jerusalem Post. You can read the Jerusalem Post online. It's my number one go-to newspaper, far and away. I read it probably every article in the Jerusalem Post. Virtually every day. A reasonably decent newspaper, actually, but it gives us insights in the place that we care the most about. The country has been celebrating Rosh Hashanah. Everybody, secular Jews and religious Jews, all celebrating Rosh Hashanah, which is the head of the Babylonian New Year.
Head of the year that's in the 7th month.
That is correct. Well, yes, in the 7th month on Yahweh's calendar, but not on the Babylonian calendar. And it's to just wonder, and I'm becoming far more judgmental the closer we get to Yahweh's return. And I just wonder how disgusted God has to be to have his people, the people that he revealed himself to, the people he liberated from the crucibles of Mitzrayim, the people that he delivered the Torah to, the people that he established the covenant with, the people whom he spoke through as prophets, the people whose language he used to reveal himself to humankind, the people whose country he calls home. Those people. Jews. Yehudim, if they knew who the hell they were, but of course they don't. Yisrael. How in the hell is it, with all of those advantages, Jews are celebrating a goddamn Babylonian New Year and treating their Babylonian Talmud as if it were scripture? No wonder they're dancing around in their black mourning suits. They're the walking dead. I'm not being anti-Semitic. I love the name. Anti-Semitic would mean I'd be against the name. Shem being the name. I love the name Yahowah, a name they never say. But God, looking down on them, must be absolutely with what his people have become. And that really is the purpose of what we do. The purpose of Towrah is to try to awaken Israelites, Jews, so that they understand what it means to be a Yahud again, so that they can crawl away from their God-forsaken religion, come to recognize that Jew is from Yahud, which is a descendant of Yahud, the son of Leah and Jacob. Therefore, it is an ethnicity. To be Jewish is not to be religious. It's not to be converted to Judaism. You know, I was reading an article about the Taliban. The tribe, Pushkin tribe, from which the Taliban are all derived, is likely Jewish. They circumcised their sons on the 8th day. They observe most of the rabbinical kosher rules. They are DNA-wise tied to Jews. And for years during the pre-Islamic era, they used to call themselves Bnei Yisrael. And so I was reading this article. It says, there's every evidence that the Taliban, which announced, by the way, they want to form international relations with every country on earth except Israel, that the Taliban are actually Jewish. And they said, but what good is it going to do to tell them they're not going to convert to Judaism? God damn it, get out of your behinds. To be Jewish is not to practice Judaism. No wonder the world's confused. You've confused them. Jewish is an ethnicity. Judaism is a religion. They are different things. Any moron can choose to practice Judaism if they want to destroy their lives, live unproductively, upset God. They can do so. But nobody can choose to be Jewish because it's an ethnicity. You're either born into it or you're not. I was watching the news these past 3 or 4 days. There was a prison break in Israel. 6 Pakistani terrorists escaped. They were all murderers. And there's a manhunt for them, but the manhunt is not going very well because the Palestinian Authority, which is the PLO, and Hamas are telling Muslims that after their Friday prayers that they need to exhibit a day of rage, and a day of rage wasn't enough, so let's have another day of rage. And they are celebrating these murderers as heroes because in Islam it's considered heroic to kill a Jew. It's not a criminal act to kill a Jew in Islam. It's heroic. And so these men are not criminals, not from their perspective, no. They're heroes. So how in the hell are you going to give that kind of mentality that thinks it's especially good to murder Jews? How are you going to give them a country right next to Israel? Wouldn't it be exactly like what happened? Well, far worse than what happened when America forced Israel to withdraw from Gaza and give the Gaza Strip to Hamas. Thank you, George Bush. Brilliant move, pal. Mm-hmm. The only difference would be because Gaza is not an independent state, they can't have a military. So they have a militia. So they have jihadists. Can you imagine what it would be like if it was a sovereign nation and they could bring in whatever kind of weaponry they wanted? Well, it would be just like Lebanon with Hezbollah. And they would have hundreds of thousands of rockets pointed at Israel. But as they riot, we are brought to the realization that here between Towrah and Kippurim in 2021, exactly 20 years after we began this mission, because it began on a Towrah in 2001, 7 days after 9/11. September 18th was the day that Yahowah asked me to engage. That we have very little time left. And it's going to get exceedingly anti-Semitic, exceedingly harsh. And so if you are a Yahud, a Jew, it's time to listen. It's time to walk away from the religion that's brought you nothing but misery. It's time to walk away from the politics of Israel that are bankrupt. It's time to recognize that you can't make peace with Muslims. Their Quran orders them to hate you, to kill you. They will perpetrate genocide given the chance. And so this is reality. All right, we're going to return to Kara called out Leviticus 23:29. That was the passage we ended the program on this time last week. It reads as follows, truthfully. Any soul, kol ha-nefesh, any, every, all souls. A soul is an individual consciousness. It is the aspect of a person that is capable of being observant and responsive. It's the only part of us that actually transcends mortality to immortality. Truthfully, any soul, which by association, Asher, does not answer and respond, lo ana, does not reply by making a declaration. It was written in the Pool Imperfect, where the object, the nephesh, is both the subject and the object, suffers the effect of continual non-responsiveness during this life-sustaining and essential estim day. This day happens to be Yom Kippurim, the Day of Reconciliations. That soul will be cut off and either eliminated or separated, karat, from being with its family. He. Now, as we look at this statement, and we read karat, which tells us that there are multiple potential outcomes for those souls who do not answer and respond to Yahweh's invitation. Karat can mean cut off, either eliminated or separated. There's a huge difference between those two. So it says if you don't answer Yahweh's invitation on Yom Kippurim, and there isn't a single religious or political Jew that is doing so, because they've turned this into a day of misery, of abasement, of abuse of their souls, of denial. Denial of reality is the truth. And any soul that doesn't answer Yahweh's invitation, not the rabbi's invitation, to celebrate not a day of deprivation, but a life-sustaining and essential day, and not a day of affliction, but a day to respond and answer, that soul will be karat, which is either to be cut off or to be eliminated and separated from being with Amhi, the family, the nation, the people, the community, related kin. Now, should separation appear more appealing than ceasing to exist, then I would say that your perspective is likely corporeal rather than spiritual. And that's really the nature of Judaism. It is a focus on the corporeal rather than the spiritual. They don't have a plan.
Same thing
for
with
what
Christianity. Ask most Christians what their view of heaven is. It's mansions and streets of gold and all very physical stuff.
Very
That's why
physical
they're so in love with the idea of a bodily resurrection.
Right. Oh yeah. And the people up there have eyes and they're looking down, and you know that's the nature of the place. Physical bodily resurrection. Not recognizing that would be about the most counterproductive thing that could possibly happen. I mean, the great liberation, and the Hebrew word for is translated salvation, to save. Its primary meaning is to liberate. And the thing we're being delivered from is not only the world of religion and, of course, politics, but also from the constraints of being a physical mortal being. And when we are liberated from that, we become like light. We become spiritual, energy-based beings. And that is infinitely superior because, well, as a mortal being, we are stuck in time. There's no way for a mortal being to ever maneuver in time. Stuck in the ordinary flow. As a physical being, we're stuck on this rock we call Earth. Oh, we can go all the way to our moon and back, once every 60 years or so, or once in an eternity of time. But that's it. Physical beings cannot maneuver around the universe. The distances are too great, and we can't even approximate the speed of light and you'd have to go much faster than the speed of light to maneuver. And so the answer is to be a energy-based being, because as light, while you're still only traveling at 186,000 miles per second, you can't actually ascribe a speed to it, because while we're giving that reference as time elapsed here on Earth over that distance, as an energy-based being, you travel that distance in no time. So if you travel this vast distance, you can travel halfway to the nearest solar system, Alpha Centauri, in 1 second on a photon of light, and therefore in 2 to 3 seconds based on Earth time. But actually light years, so that would be in not seconds, but 2 years if you're traveling at the speed of light. I'm sorry. So at 2 years to 3 years. If you're actually on the photon of light, it wouldn't take the 2 or 3 years to go to our nearest. It's actually a binary system, because it would take no time at all. Because time doesn't move as it does as a physical being. One of the things that I came up with, and I think I shared it in the last program, Kirk and JB, was that, I made a big deal about several things in the presentation of the Mikra. One we're going to get into tonight, which is that God is not telling us that we should not do any work with the Malaka, but we should not do the work of our spiritual mother, the feminine manifestation of Yahweh's message. The other is that 3 times during the Moed Mikra, Yahweh specifically asks us to approach to specifically draw near to the Isha, which I always translate as the feminine manifestation of God's fiery light, which is designed to purify and enlighten, empower, and elevate so that we can approach Yahweh. And that is vastly different, of course, than all English translations, but Isha is the Hebrew word for fire. Yahweh represents himself as fire, and the only difference between Ish, how Yahweh represented himself on Horeb, and Isha is Isha's feminine. And one of the things I came up with, and it speaks to the stupidity and counterproductive nature of being a physical being. One of the reasons that Yahweh uses this metaphor of fire is because fire is the result of transforming a physical, organic object, like wood, into energy and light. And so fire is the very essence of the purpose of the Moed Mikra, which is to transfer, to evolve us from physical, mortal beings to entities more akin to energy and light. And that's exactly what happens in a fire. That's the essence of what a fire is. It's transformative of physical organic material into energy. Helps to point out what God's trying to achieve and why that is vastly superior. So, if we've listened to Yahweh and we've accepted the conditions of the Bereth covenant, we've responded and answered his invitations during the Mikra, our nefesh, our consciousness, enveloped in his ruach, will ascend to Shamaim and live among the family of souls. Do you know that if you were to study, and which I've done, Rabbinic Judaism, there's no concept of salvation.
I'm shocked by that too.
Yeah, no concept of salvation. There's no way that a person can either earn or be gifted a trip to Shamaim. That's not the purpose of rabbinic Judaism. Purpose is to live a righteous life. Of course, by abusing women and
fellow men,
destroying any hope of success that your sons and daughters may have, and corrupting Yahweh's testimony, so that if as they claim that they're Torah observant, they make being Torah observant look like a miserable ordeal. But there is no means to heaven in rabbinic Judaism, because of course they're clueless as to the purpose of the covenant, benefits of the covenant. You never hear them speaking of it, and they're clueless as to what the purpose of each of the 7 Moed Mikrei are. So there's no plan of salvation. Rabbis also deny Sheol. They say there's no such place as hell. That's going to come as quite a shock to them, because they're all headed there. And that is the second place that you can go, and that's what Karat is telling us. You can be separated from Yisrael, or individuals who engage and endure with God. And the only place of separation is Sheol. And Sheol, while we're talking about space and the distances and the like, Sheol is virtually identical to a black hole. It is infinite in time and finite in all other dimensions. It is a lightless place from which nothing escapes. Crushing. So there'll be very little difference between Sheol and a black hole. And, think of this too, that the individuals that are separated unto Sheol are not going to be physical beings. They're not, sorry Allah, they're not going to be hung by their breasts if they're women. They're not going to have molten pitch poured down their throat. Sorry, Mohammed, you got that part wrong too. No, they don't have physical beings. These are souls. They're energy-based beings. And energy cannot escape a black hole either. And anything that's physical is going to be transformed in energy upon entering the black hole. So Sheol is a prison, a lightless place of separation, that is a place where souls, like those of the rabbis, those of pastors and priests, those who have misled in the name of God, are going to spend their eternity. And of course, the third option, which is that they're going to cease to exist, which is an aspect of Karat. That's the overwhelming preponderance of souls. They're not going to be punished. They're not going to be rewarded. They're at the end of their mortal existence, that upon their demise, they dissipate to nothingness. So, God is not going to make an exception for he might for you, JB. I've lived a good life, plea. But fortunately, you've answered the terms and conditions of the covenant and the Mikrei, so your body won't have to use that one. I have a good heart. It's not going to fly either. He's not being entirely rigid in this proposition. It's straightforward. The actional verb here is ana. It was conveyed in the imperfect conjugation. This means that the moment we stop being stupid by rebuffing Yahweh's invitation and choose to respond to his summons, hey, we're good to go. Option 1 is still in the offing. That's pretty cool. I spent my youth being a Twistian. Twistian is the formal and correct title of the religious, because they've twisted everything God says. So we'll call them Twistians, just like we have Fakistinians, because there's no such thing as a Palestinian. But the moment you answer Yahweh's invitations, you're no longer subject to this indictment, because it was written in the imperfect. It's one of the things that make being with God so daggone easy. You can be stupid. I was for a very long time. And the moment you stop being stupid, God says, hey, it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Pop.
Yeah, thanks, Pop. It's a heck of a deal.
I like it.
Yeah.
What's the complaint?
What's to complain about? It's not written in the perfect. If it was written in the perfect, we'd be screwed, blue, tattooed. We have all.
Everyone would be.
Yeah, everybody would be.
Yes.
Perfect,
Yes,
everyone. What the difference, by the way, in the perfect and the imperfect, for those who don't know, most of you I'm sure know because we've talked about it so long. The perfect speaks of an action, because these are conjugations that describe verbal action. In Hebrew, verbs are not stuck in time, so there is no past, present, and future tenses in Hebrew. Every statement is true throughout time. So Hebrew, as a language, is very much like light, where they simply exist in time. They're liberated in time, as opposed to stuck in time like a physical being. And so with the perfect, we have a finite action that is completed, either in the past, the present, or the future. So if there's one and done, for example, if this said, anybody who one time does not answer my invitation is going to be eternally separated, there's nothing you could do. Nothing. It's over because it's one and done. But in the imperfect, it speaks of ongoing and habitual behavior. So ongoing and habitual behavior ceases to be ongoing when you cease doing it. So it does make things. Yeah, it makes things so much easier. Go ahead.
That's so changed. I know I was going to say that's so changed when you wrote. When you wrote about it, then you put it in a solid book form of the Tablets of Stone. I mean, that so changes everything. Just that one clue.
One clue. Yeah.
It
so
opens up the whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, with what's called the commandments, there's only one of the 10 that is written in the in a mood that could even be interpreted as a command.
Yeah.
And yet, that mood is actually and almost overwhelmingly an expression of second person volition.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So free will. Well, second person volition or free will. It is the one about properly valuing our father and mother. Of course, he's talking about our heavenly father and spiritual mother. And when we properly assess them and value them, then our days are prolonged in the land, which is a metaphor for Shamayim. So God is, as I say, is not rigid in this, in the sense that all you have to do is stop. And you are good to go. Now, turning to the other verb, not only does karat provide for both eventualities, the elimination or the exile of a soul, it offers a contrast. The contrast is that the covenant was established with the same verb. It was karat, cut. And the reason it was karat, cut, as opposed to any of the other words in Hebrew that could have been used to convey, to make, to offer, to give, to bestow, to establish, is that everything that has value in the Torah is separated unto God, separated from the common things of man, like religion and politics, conspiracy, and separated and set apart unto God. So if you create a division by cutting, you're on one side or the other. The covenant is on God's side of that division. Mankind and religion and politics and those things that are common are on the other side. So the verb speaks of both of these things, which makes it considerably richer. Also telling, karat, to cut, or out of to include or exclude, it was shaded by the Niphal perfect. In this case, the subject, which is the soul, both carries out and receives the result of Karath, being cut off at this moment in time. Therefore, whatever fate we receive is the one we've chosen. God is really fair in this regard. That's what that stem indicates. Now, there's a lot of challenges in this particular verse, and I want to read it again because it is important that we get it right, and I don't know if this is the right environment to, on an audio program, to try to explain the grammatical choices that are in it. I don't think that no matter what you do with these choices makes any difference in the meaning of the sentence, but I'm going to read it again because this is life and death. That's what this is. This is life and death, particularly if you are a Yisraelite or a Yehud. Truthfully, any soul which by association does not respond during this life-sustaining and essential day, Yom Kippurim, that soul will be cut off and either eliminated or separated from being with its family. So just some of the nuances here, and I'll try to highlight them quickly, is that nephesh is a feminine noun, and so it is, if we're talking about it being an object, we would speak of it as it, which is how I rendered it for the most part. But it's in Hebrew, it's referred to as a she. Now, there's a lot of feminine nouns in Hebrew that are applied to masculine individuals. Yahweh. Yahweh is a feminine name applied to Yahweh, our Heavenly Father. Yehudah, name of a young man, but it's a feminine name in Hebrew. I've been writing a lot about Zeroah because there's a fourth one. There's not just Moshe, clearly a man, but Zeroah is a feminine noun in Hebrew. Dod was a Zeroah, Yosha was a Zeroah, and there's a fourth one. So a lot of times there are feminine nouns that are applied to masculine individuals. And in some ways, the purpose of that is to say that even as a man, in fact, especially as a man, you should have some nurturing qualities. You ought to have some empathy. You know, being a man isn't all about pounding your chest and being protective, or those things are important. There is an aspect of Zeroah, for example, where we act as shepherds. We tend God's flock. We share Yahweh's Torah, which is another feminine noun, sowing the seeds of truth, which take root and souls benefit as descendants grow. That is the fruit of those seeds. So there are cases like this. Nephesh happens to be one of them.
Could it also?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, no. Could it also be because it pertains so much to a Zeroah, for instance, pertains so much to being entwined or so involved with the Ruach Kodesh? I mean, it is her doing. It's like a giant blast.
You know, when you think about it, you may have a point because. I've been translating some passages here about Moshe, and it announces that Moshe, Yashayah, Yashayah is very, very fixated on the Zeroah, all four of them. In fact, he's more fixated on the fourth Zeroah than the others, but he uses the earlier Zeroah to explain the nature of the fourth Zeroah. And when he's talking about Moshe and the children of Yisrael, he says specifically that the Ruach Kodesh was upon him. So he's talking about all of Israel, but the Ruach Kodesh was on him. He was a Zeroah.
Yeah.
What happens with Dod? Yahweh finds Dod. He is 8 years old. He's the first thing that Shemuel is asked to do is anoint him. And as he is being anointed, Yahweh announces that my Ruach Kodesh came upon him and never left him. Dode is the ultimate Zeroah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Yosha has Yahweh's spirit. And we know that Yosha has Yahweh's soul. But we also know that Yosha has Yahweh's Ruach Kodesh because he cites the opening line of Mizmor 22.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's saying, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me? Well, it's the soul that's making the declaration, which means the only part of Yahweh that could have left him is the Ruach Kodesh. So Yosha, as the third Zeroah, was clearly covered with the Ruach Kodesh, and so she is the one that is empowering the Zeroah. And then, you know, we look at the fourth Zeroah. Yeshayah speaks of that fellow in the 11th chapter, where he says specifically, this character is so lame. He's not like these other dudes. He needs a lot of help. So all 7 of the big guns of the Ruach Kodesh are on this fella. God's got a lot to make up for.
You don't get much help from anybody else.
Yeah, man. Yeah, there's nobody else that you got all 7 spirits of Yahweh on. But this dude needs some serious showing up. Yeah, there you go. Gave him all 7 yards. So we then, you know, run into Asher, which in that statement, which by association. But is it which by association or who by association? When we're talking about a nephesh, that's personal. We would, you know, if I was speaking of your soul, Kirk or JB, I would speak of you using a personal pronoun like who, not which. So it is just part of the grammar that's it's interesting here. The soul in English is sort of an it, but in Hebrew it's written as a her, which could be part of a him. I guess this is the first lesson in transgender. No, it's not a physical thing here. The same question arises with the verb karath, which was conveyed in third person feminine singular, which we could say it or she when addressing the this either an object, which is the soul, or the person with whom the soul resides. I wrote that soul because I thought that probably read better in English. And then we come to the end and we're dealing with he, which is her family. So the soul that doesn't answer the invitation is either cut off or separated from her family, and her family being Yisrael. Now, the next challenge, of course, is Are you being cut off from the covenant family? Yes. Are you being cut off from the people? Well, so long as you define people correctly, yes. Mm-hmm. Though, is almost always used in reference to Yahweh's people, the chosen people, Yisrael. If God's going to speak of people other than Yisrael, rather than family, he's going to use Goy. So he's still talking about Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God. But it can also mean related kin, community, sometimes ethnicity or nation. Further, pronounced M rather than the same 2 letters serve as an inclusive preposition. While M means together with and among, I've therefore rendered it he is being with its family, because I think that's God's thought, and it's more fitting for the kinship of living souls.
Well, like you said, a soul is a being of energy. It doesn't really have gender anymore at that point.
Though I do kind of wonder, as we go from the physical world to the spiritual world, I think we're actually going to retain our gender. I don't think we're going to retain our, in the spiritual world anyway, a sexuality, but I think we are going to retain gender. I think.
Oh yeah.
I think God
it's also
likes,
part of your personality.
That is correct. It's part of our personality, who we are, and how we relate to the world and to one another. And so, I want to share eternity with my wife, and I'd really prefer she stay a woman in that relationship. I like dudes, but not as much as I like my wife. The second part of it, though, is sensuality. That this thing that God created for all animals to enjoy, and particularly in humanity, is just such a marvelous part of what God created, that I'm actually thinking that it may well be possible in the hereafter, not as when we are energy-based beings, but because as an energy-based being, and E equals mc squared, and an energy-based being the square of the speed of light times the square of the speed of light times the speed of light, greater than the same amount of matter, that we should be able to make the transition at any point. And that's really necessary, because how else do we continue to observe Pesach if we can't take physical form? How do we keep track of time and observe these dates if we can't have some semblance of a physical nature from time to time? How do we enjoy interacting with animals as Yahweh and Adam did in the garden if we can't take a physical form? So I think we'll be able to, and I can't imagine that sensuality will be deprived from those things. So I actually think we will have gender. How far that goes, I don't know. All right, at this point of our review in Yahweh's story, it's unlikely, of course, that you'd be here with us unless you're into the details, committed to learning and understanding. So I don't think it's a problem to to get this nitty gritty into what the potentials are with a statement, particularly this important. The fact is, we're people, we're not machines, and there's a lot that goes along with that. When we consider this presentation now, this is God's presentation of Yom Kippur in the context of its fulfillment. And there are two entire prophetic books that are devoted to it, the entirety of Zechariah and the entirety of Malachi, the two last prophets. That's all they speak about, is the fulfillment of Kippur. The prophet tells us that upon the occasion of Yahweh's return, those who do not revere Yahweh's name, those who do not respect his Shabbat, those who do not embrace his word, they're going to be uprooted, and they're going to be severed from the land and the vine. So this is yet another affirmation that God's going to return on this day. The rabbis are absolutely wrong. It's a mistake that Maimonides made regarding their year. We are now just 12 years away from year 6,000 Yah. 2033 will be year 6,000 Yah. So it is on the horizon. And let's be clear, because God is being precise. He is not saying, as Christians or Muslims profess, obey me or I'll torture you in hell forever. Instead, he is announcing, if you ignore my invitation to resolve our differences, then your current mortal existence is the only life that you're going to experience. And by the way, for those Muslims in Israel that are chanting death to Jews and who are rioting, destroying the promised land, in my view, you were given one life too many. Your life is overwhelmingly counterproductive. You're a net liability on this planet. You don't deserve the promised land. You deserve nothing. And so we have a lot of people on this planet who are net liabilities and not net assets. But God did not say, obey me or I'll torture you in hell forever. Instead, he is announcing, if you ignore my invitations to resolve our differences, then this is the only life you're going to experience. So, if you oppose Yahweh, his people, or his intent, you're going to be held accountable. The consequence of which will be eternal exile. The provision is from God. The choice is ours. I do want to be clear, though, because there is this myth that God just loves everybody and that God is all loving and he's going to come back with open arms. That's not true. As we proceed through the last 10 or so chapters of Yada Yahweh, one of the most prevalent themes is recompense. Yahweh is going to demand recompense. He is going to have closure. I was reading about families that 10 years ago suffered horrifically when some Islamic suicide bombers, jihadists, in Paris decided to go off and kill a lot of innocent civilians. One which is still pronouncing, do you have any announcement to make a trial? He says, yes, I am. There is but one God, and that is Allah, and Muhammad is his servant, and that I am a servant of the Islamic State, was his pronouncement. He was proud of what he had done as a murderer, because he's a good Muslim. When I was reading these articles, one of the things that resonated is that the families of those people, they want closure. They deserve closure. They deserve to know that those who brutalized their children, in fact, one man, one of these jihadists, slashed him and then precluded an ambulance from coming to get him, and he bled to death. All those families of 9/11, they deserve closure. They deserve to know that this was perpetrated by fundamentalist Muslims. And those fundamentalist Muslims that killed 3,000 people on 9/11 have to be held accountable. They can't just slip from being mass murderers into nothingness without a penalty. Because to go from life to death is not a penalty. You were given a life. You not only squandered it, your life was counterproductive. And if you have one of those kinds of lives, it isn't fair to those that you abused. Of course, the most glaring would be anybody that aided and abetted the Holocaust. Another example would be anybody that aided and abetted the Inquisition. Anybody that aided and abetted the Roman Catholic Church over the 1,500 years that they were the most anti-Semitic and most abusive institution on earth. Anyone who back in the day aided and abetted Rome as it attacked and destroyed Israel not once but 3 times. Those people, those souls, have to be held accountable or God's not fair. So be aware that those of you today, for example, that are mixing your conspiracy theories, and many of you now, your favorite conspiracy is anti-vax, and claims of covenant or use of Yahweh's name or anything that appears in any one of these books. There's a consequence for that. You are leading people astray. You're discrediting this work that Yahweh has authorized and inspired. And you're going to be held accountable unless you stop. So accountability is a big deal with God. and because he's fair, because he is just, because he is moral. You know, if we didn't have accountability, can you imagine how many thieves there would be? How many liars there would be? How many cheats there would be? I mean, nothing would be safe if we didn't have a legal system and held people accountable. And we're immoral beings. God's not. God is perfectly moral. Now, what's interesting, of course, of retribution, while we're on this subject, is that God never works alone. Ever. You know, his return, he is going to influence the universe and his children through a man forevermore. Dowd. Dowd is King of Kings forever. So God has chosen to work through even a human being in this regard, his son, the Messiah. But in achieving recompense, God has picked the individual that he said that individual is going to carry it out. So important to know that there is a consequence of this behavior, and also it's important to know that God's going to be fair, and so the person who brutally tortured, trying to agonize and prolong the suffering and death and humiliation of Jews during the Inquisition, that what they're going to suffer is going to be at least 7 times what they imposed. But keep in mind that at this point, they're not physical beings. So the agony they're going to feel is going to be imposed on their nephesh souls. So this is not a gruesome scene, but it is a scene where those who were victimized know that those who abused them are finally been held accountable. This was something I was very, very uncomfortable with until about 2 years ago, and I understood God's need to do it. And now I've gone from saying, let's go do it. I get it now. It has to be that way. And I don't expect everybody to agree with me now. It's a hard thing for most of us to think that between now and the time that we deal with forever, there's a period of accountability. But there is. God doesn't go from Kippurim to Sukkah in a nanosecond. It's 5 days. It's 5 days. And that 5 days, as a spiritual being, can be extended however long is necessary to get this accomplished. But the set-apart spirit is the power and the enlightenment and the force behind the person carrying out the retribution. So, they're and I'm sure they're going to have every malach that's available as part of the job, so it'll get done in that 5 days.
Yeah.
Now, the integrated fabric of the Torah and prophets conveys a consistent message. Forgiveness and reconciliations are gifts granted by Yahweh. They're not for everybody. Therefore, those who think that they can provide for themselves, well, for those of you that are trying to be kosher, that won't get on an airplane because it is the Shabbat, won't even turn on a light bulb, it wouldn't save somebody. Well, there is a less desirable option. And any soul which, by association, continually attempts to perform any part of the work, Ashah Kol, Malaka, of the Malaka, the spiritual counselor and maternal messenger. Malaka is heavenly envoy and feminine representative. It's from Malak, spiritual messenger, the feminine of Malak. during this life-sustaining and essential, we're still on Kippurim, that specific and individual soul, eth ha-nefesh ha-hu, everything associated with this person and their consciousness, the aspect of this individual, God says, I will eliminate such that it ceases to exist from being around the family or striving against the community of living souls. This is Kareb Hu. Kara called out Leviticus, hate to say that name, 23:20. Now, this is a decree against religion, not work. God loves work. You know, the day that's most special to him, he's not saying, this day you can't do squat. What is the very thing that he said about Adam in the garden? Because we're returning to the garden. We're coming full circle back to the garden. What did he tell us about Adam? The very first thing about Adam in the garden. He brought Adam to do what?
Tend the garden. Take care of it.
To work it. Right.
Keep it going.
To work there. Because when we stop working, we lose our sense of value. We're not making a contribution. We're not contributing anything to anybody. God loves work. He's constantly underscoring the value of work. So he's not taking his most important day and saying, don't do this thing that I'm telling you is so important to who you are and who I am. Moreover, the English translations that say, don't do any of your ordinary work, as if Asha was ordinary and then Malaka was work, or as if Asha was work and Malaka was work, so it's don't do any work.
Work.
Yeah, you've got to be so blind not to see the obvious. There isn't any lexicon that shares roots that doesn't tell you that Malaka is from Malak. And that's true. And they all do. And what's interesting about that is, for the most part, the lexicons and dictionaries that do share roots share verbal roots. They're not nearly as keen on sharing the root of a noun if it isn't a verb, because in Hebrew and most ancient languages, the actionable concept, the verbal concept, because it's so visual, it's so, it's got like our whole memories. I don't know if you know this, but the trick to transitioning from a short-term memory to a long-term memory is to see something in action. So if somebody tells you your name, and then you create a caricature that's moving around that person's face or image, the movement, the action is what makes that transition for you. But this is a non-actionable concept. It's the root, which is malak. And malak means messenger. It is used to describe Yahweh's heavenly implements, his spiritual messengers. So a counselor, if you will. But it is feminine. So I happen to know one of those. Got 7 of them dancing around all over me, saying, "Hey, stupid! This is here. This is me. Pay attention." So God is not asking his people not to work. He is endeavoring to tell us to don't replace the role of the mikre or the malaka. That's his job. We ought not try to be the Passover lamb. When Christians wrote, "Pick up your cross and follow me," what a stupid idea.
Did you miss the point of the story? He did it so we don't have to.
Right, you missed the whole point of the story. And by the way, the cross was a Roman torture device. Oh my, that's what my God wants, man. I guess that God, he must have been a rabbi. Pick up that torture stick and follow me. You ought to be tortured just like I was tortured. That's going to work out really well for you. You'll fit right in with the rabbinical type at Yom Kippur. No. Not what God's saying. He says, don't do that stuff. What did the Malaka do on Pesach? Hardest thing in the world. Separated herself from Yahweh's soul. Because what? That's the whole concept of Sheol, the place of separation. That's the penalty that she removed from us by having Yahweh's soul endure it. So when Yahweh's soul was separated from his spirit, that's the entire concept of the place of separation of Sheol. He wouldn't even have had to go to Sheol to experience the penalty, because the penalty is separation from Yahweh. My God, why have you separated yourself from me? Read the 22nd Mizmor. We're not making this stuff up. That's what it says. That's the whole concept of this. That is the Malaka. Don't do that.
May I interject a little something?
Sure. Uh-huh.
On the Malaka, one of the things that I found on the Malak, rather just like the Malaka, is a spiritual being, of course, but it walks. One of the older definitions, it walks or it travels for another, or one who walks with a protected staff in hand. Well, there's an actionable root, a halak, to keep your memory there. They're always, look what they did with Lot.
Yeah.
They show up and they walk and eat with Abraham. They walk here, they walk there. They're always engaged in action. So there's your actionable root, if you like, to connect the idea. So.
Well, there is a lamed in Malaka, right?
That's right.
Second letter of Malaka is a lamed, which is a shepherd's staff. And the last letter of Malaka is a person standing up and walking.
Engaged.
Correct?
Walking, yeah. So,
there's also a mem, and what is the mem? Symbolic of water, the source of life and cleansing. That is the symbol of the Spirit, right?
Mm-hmm. And it moves.
Right. And you've got a cough, which is the open hand of God.
And it has movement too, up and down.
Right. So you've got it all there. It's
So all the definitions are good. Yeah. Cool.
So in Judaism, there is no consensus on the immortality of a soul. I'm telling you, with Yahweh, he's not so confused. Souls can die. Despite what Yahweh conveys, rabbis do not accept the idea, as I've shared with you, of Sheol, hell, surveyed as a place of eternal separation and thus punishment for what they have done to mislead Yahweh's people. Now, that's no surprise. I don't think I would want to admit there's a Sheol if God said you're going there. I get it why they don't admit it. Not going to change anything, but nonetheless, I understand. Similarly, there is no consensus in Judaism on salvation or even of heaven, with rabbis speaking of the redemption of Jews as a race through the religion. That's their concept of salvation. To explain away their miserable lives, they claim that their G-D deliberately punishes the most righteous of them, so that by comparison, whatever follows will seem better. And I kid you not. And so, the most miserable person must be the most righteous. I guess it was an honor to go to Auschwitz then, according to the rabbis. The Hashem of Judaism.
I'd rather not be so honored.
Yeah, nor me. The Hashem of Judaism is as perverted as the rabbis. In previous chapters, by the way, so is the Jesus of Christianity. A God who would create an inferior being to worship them is deranged. That's a disgusting individual. I mean, I'm a long way. The distance between me and a garden slug is much smaller. In my case, it's probably 2 nanoseconds worth of difference. But the difference between me and a garden slug is much less than the difference between me and God. And if I could create a garden slug, which of course I'm incapable of doing, and I could program that garden slug to tell me 24/7, oh, Greg, you are just the best. You are a handsome dude. You are funny. You are just the best in the world. I love you dearly. After about 3 seconds of that garden slug burping out that rubbish, listen, when somebody I respect say, I really appreciate it. You're a great guy. I'm so grateful that you've done this, that, and the other thing. I say, blah, blah, blah. Please don't do that. Great. I don't like praise, even if it's genuine. But
another knowledge that's so close now with artificial intelligence. It's like you programmed an artificial intelligence to just walk around and tell you how great you are all day.
Yeah.
That would get annoying.
If that didn't get annoying, then you're probably a narcissist and a psychopath. And if God wanted us to do that, he'd be a narcissist and a psychopath. Mm-hmm. So this idea of worshiping God is absolute rubbish. It's so demeaning and degrading to God. Now, we previously detailed the nature, and the Malaka comes up all through it. In fact, the Malaka is God's just in his preamble, talking about Chag Matzah, which is Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. As God's talking about Chag Matzah, he introduces us to the Malaka. In fact, before he even begins his presentation of what the day represents, he's telling us about the Malaka. The Malaka is integrated into this presentation of the Moed Mikra and what God is saying, just as she exists right here in Kippurim. It's a direct tie-in to the Isha, which we're asked to come into the presence of God's fiery light, the feminine manifestation of that light. Well, the Malaka, we're saying, okay, you do that. She's going to adorn you in a garment of light. Don't do what the rabbis do and go put on a black jacket, a black coat, and black pants, and a black hat. You can't do that job. She's really good at it, and you're crappy at it. Now, it is irrefutable that Malaka is the feminine of Malak, spiritual messenger. The ending makes a word feminine. She represents the maternal aspects of Yahweh's persona, which are obviously significant because Yahweh's name is also feminine. Also known as the Ruach Kodesh, set-apart spirit, the Malaka is particularly active during the Moed Mikra. Right from the very beginning, in fact, before the beginning, the Malaka represents Yahweh's interest by serving us. Abad, I rendered, I will eliminate such an individual that's such that they cease to exist. It's the best possible outcome, actually, for those who would contravene the work of the Malaka. With Abad conveying, I will exterminate and wipe away, causing to perish, annihilate, and destroy, it reinforces everything Yahweh revealed in the previous statement using karath, eliminated or separated. So God has put us on notice that a religious soul is a squandered soul. It has no value. It will either be taken away and disappear, or it will be driven from mortality to endure immortality in an entirely different place. Also reinforced were our conclusions regarding he, which being with the family, among the community and kinship of living souls, at the conclusion of the previous statement, Kara 23:29. This realization is taken one step further in Kara 23:30 with min karab he. So from being around the family and away from striving against the community of living souls. God does not want his children exposed to the religious. We're going back to Eden. How many denominations of Christianity and of Judaism were there in Eden?
Zero.
How many political parties were there in Eden?
Not a one.
Yeah, blue and white, Likud? I don't think so. No. United Torah, Israel? No. No political parties. No religious sects. Were there any conspiracies in Eden? I don't think so.
No.
Any anti-Semites? No.
I don't think so.
No. No Muslims either. Were there any socialist secular humanists? No. No. I bet you, since everybody seems to think that God is blessing our troops, there must have been troops there. No.
What concept?
No. As much as liberals are against walls, surely there weren't any walls there, were there?
Yes,
One from me.
So God is protective. He wants to separate that which is his from that which is not. Now, during our review of Hosea's prophecies regarding Yisrael and Yehudah, we'll end up devoting an entire chapter to the realization that there are three unique and vastly different outcomes awaiting human souls. At that time, absolute proof, at least I think it's absolute proof, is provided to confirm that some souls will live forever with Yahowah in Shamayim, some souls will endure eternity in Sheol with Hasatan and all of his rabbinical buddies, incarcerated within a black hole. The old story, a priest and a rabbi walk into a bar. Yeah, that's going to be Sheol. But most souls will follow. Somebody turn off the lights. Most souls will follow man's artificial and unreliable, albeit popular, path towards their dissolution, which remains the primary outcome depicted in these statements. According to the Torah teaching, and hundreds more like it, this one tells us that the fate of a soul is determined based upon whether a person has listened to Yah and responded appropriately. Those who ignore the summons and try to save themselves will find death to be the end of life. But those who deceive, those who corrupt Yahweh's message and tell people such thing as God wants us to be afflicted, disturbed, and oppressed, existing in a state of anxiety and distress, bending down and being miserable and wretched, well, you're going to get what you want.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to get.
You like it, you got it.
You like it, you got it. God's fair. They will spend eternity in a lightless prison designed for similarly religious individuals. Rabbinical thought on life and either heaven or hell is muddled, to say the least. To their credit, rabbis associated their Talmudic Olam Haba in the forever, errantly rendered the world to come. I mean, they can't say Shamayim, they can't say covenant family, they can't say with Yahweh, so it is the Olam Haba, the world to come, with a return to the Gan Eden. The thought is that a soul exists in a disembodied state until the time of a bodily resurrection in the days of the Messiah. They don't know who the Messiah is. And yeah, Judaism actually does believe in a bodily resurrection because you've got to have a body in a physical world. And how in the world are you going to have all of those restrictive rules if you don't have bodies? The best Talmudic story I could find in which the world to come appears to refer to an afterlife tells of Rabbi Joseph, who is the son of Rabbi Joshua ben Levi, who dies and then returns back to life. So his father, I'm not making this up. This is what is their explanation. So his father asked him. Father doesn't say, "Hey, son, it's good to have you back." No, father asked him, "What did you see?" And he replied, "I beheld a world the reverse of this one. Those who are on top were below there, and vice versa." He, Joshua ben Levi, said to him, "My son, you have seen a corrected world." Talmud Bavli Pashim 50 Aleph. That's the closest they get. Google it sometime. You know, the afterlife. And this is the best story I could find in Rabbinic Judaism. And that makes about as much sense as anything I've ever seen. What that's basically saying is this world that God created is the opposite of what's good. And so to have a correct world, you have to have the opposite of what God created. Pretty special, huh?
Wait, does that mean the Jews should be disrespecting the rabbis rather than giving them the seat of honor at the dinner table?
I think so. Yeah, that's
very good.
Yeah. You know who actually gets the seat of honor at the dinner table?
You should not be going to synagogue.
Yes, and they're not going to like this very much, but you know the seat of honor at the dinner table for Jews is the place is set for Elia.
Yeah.
And little do they know, Elia is actually coming back at Passover. Indeed, it's just that first thing he's going to do, is lambast rabbis in Judaism. So this is neither clear nor credible what's in the Talmud, but it was the best I could find. All of the tedium involved in being Hasidic hardly seems worth the effort, does it?
Not at all.
No. By the way, I don't get it either. Now, since our decision to accept, reject, or ignore Yahweh's invitation to reconcile our relationship as life and death, acceptance or expulsion, Yahweh decided that warning us twice was not enough, and therefore he reemphasizes this cause and consequence a third time. This now is the 31st statement of the 23rd chapter of Korah. Do not consistently or habitually, must be written in the imperfect, right? Attempt to perform the work, lo asha. Do not continually reassign that which is associated with accomplishing the service, engaging to do or profit from the endeavors of, called imperfect, pertaining to any association with, kol, the malaka, the spiritual counsel and maternal messenger. This is an eternal and everlasting, clearly communicated and inscribed prescription for living, chukah, throughout your generations in every situation and dwelling place. So do you think that God said, do not do any work? This is an eternal, clearly communication for all generations and places. Don't do any work, or just don't engage in any work. In fact, since this is now not tied to the day, this is just a general statement. This is not tied to Yom Kippurim. There is no reference to the essential day here. There's no reference to Kippurim here. Yes, presented in the context of it. But it simply says, if you were to translate Malakah as work, do not do any work or work. This is an eternal or everlasting communication. Well, you know, God bless them, those Hasidic Jews, they got it right. They don't work. If that were the correct translation, they've nailed it. They sit around all day acting religious and expect the state to cover every aspect of their lives. They don't work because they've read this as don't do any work. Did you spend any time around Malakah in your studies during the week, Kirk?
Well, a little bit. I mean, the thing that was interesting though about this is I went to all the besides the Masoretic texts, all the Christian things, and they all say exactly the same thing. They just can't get over this.
Well, the Christians,
won't let it be. They won't let it be a spiritual counselor.
Well,
you know, they won't let it be a law.
The Christians make no attempt to be experts in Hebrew. That's not their thing. And the Christians don't.
You even mention it, they immediately go to the Greek and the New Testament and all that. They don't want to have anything to do with that Old Testament.
They don't want anything to do with it, and they want the Torah to be as mean-spirited as Jews have rendered it.
Yeah.
Right? Because then there's a reason for Paul to have buff things up and say, hey, that's all mean-spirited. We got a new plan. So, you know, not doing any work is just fine with them. And the whole idea of afflicting oneself, that's just fine with them because that's for the Jews. It's not for the rest of us. And that's, of course, for them, it's not even for the Jews because God doesn't annul all of it. But the words here are not complicated.
No, the choke is... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, lo asah. Asah is, I'm betting that is a verb. Asah is rendered 400, 500, 600 times. We typically render asah engage in, act upon. You know, it means to do, to work, to accomplish, to assign, to contribute, do, but it's act and engage in. And Malakah, there is absolutely nothing associated with Malakah that could get you to work.
Mm-hmm.
There are 4 or 5 Hebrew words for work, and Malakah is not one of them. But Malakah is clearly from Malak, and Malak is, I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of times Malak appears in the Torah and prophets, but a lot, hundreds upon hundreds of times. These are not complicated terms, and Malakah is defined in context. So the chukah, should you be confused as to what chukah is, go read the 119th Psalm. I mean, Dode says there's 4 things you got to understand about the Torah, and one of them is chukah.
Yeah.
It's bakat, chukah, mishpat, and mitzvah are the 4 things. Yeah. He says if you got those 4 things down regarding the Torah, then you've got it framed. Chukah is an inscribed, cut in, so engraved and inscribed prescription for living that cuts you into a relationship.
Yeah. It's well, I look at it like it was if chalk is prescription for living, and if they're cut and engraved, then of course you where those you find those. But if it separates and protects by the letters, I mean at least the root does, and the person who's standing up and is engaged, if you like, chukah with the AH sound, and you've got I look at it like this is the process. We get to celebrate these wonderful parties. We're not, but the reason we're there is it's good to say thank you and appreciate what Yahweh's done. I mean, and it's and if we're going to blow the horn or wave the thing or do what we do on Fridays, at least we get to do that. But when we share it with family and so forth, so it just doesn't translate the way everybody translates. How could everybody miss that?
Well, I think
I didn't know to look up all these things. I didn't know how to look up all these things when I started. I'm just going, wow.
Yeah, I'm in the midst of rewriting Introduction to God, and by the way, the Moed,
good too. By the way.
The Moed. Thank you. The Moed chapter is or volume is now posted on Yada Yahweh. It's also available at Amazon.com. So I think there's 19 volumes now that are available, maybe 20. Through Amazon.com, and they're all presented on the Yada Yahweh website. And right now, I am writing volume 1 of an introduction to God. And I don't know if I'll just leave it at volume 1 and then add Torah to it, which would be 2 more volumes, or put Torah into Yada Yahweh. I haven't made that decision yet. But as I'm writing it, one of the things that I'm doing is going through what how important it is to get the words God communicated right, and how there are no translations that do so. And this is just such a glaring case because these words are very common. There's not a single word in this declaration that is difficult to understand, nor in the previous one, nor in the one before that. And so why is it that they all get it wrong? And what I have surmised is that, and business, one of the things is that familiarity sells. Why does Nike pay athletes tens of millions of dollars to wear their swoosh? Why do you see the swoosh on team jerseys and just nothing more? Because Nike knows that if you're familiar with this swoosh and if it's associated with something that you believe in, that you're going to view it favorably. So these English translations. That's the whole reason
McDonald's came up with kids' playgrounds. They knew if they got them young, you put in they associate those golden arches with good times, good feelings.
Right.
People will keep coming back.
Right, and the golden arches are everywhere. So it's about familiarity. And so when somebody says, I'm going to create and market a new translation, if everything about it was unfamiliar because you've chosen to translate it accurately from the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'd have no customers. There's no customers. It's like you could take the royalties of everything that I've earned thus far of 20 years of translating, and you may be able to go to McDonald's and buy something from the dollar meal. But
that's why you got to give your translations away. No one's willing to
take them. That is correct. You have to give them away because nobody is going to.
Even then, people don't want to read them.
That's right. It's just the way it is. That familiarity sells, and there's nothing as unfamiliar as Yahowah and His testimony. It is the opposite.
A mouthful there.
Yeah, it's the opposite of common. And so a common Bible translation is the opposite of God's testimony. It's the opposite of what God said. And to convey what He communicated, you have to risk having people judge you and say, I can't believe that you can be right and everybody else is wrong. Well, don't believe. Go verify it for yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, 14 years have proven that you can, and they are wrong.
Yeah, you can. You can verify it for yourself. We're making a big claim here about Malacca. So go look it up. And don't use just one lexicon. Yeah, you're going to look up Malak, and the first thing you're going to see is work, or ordinary work, or some notion like that, and then see what the justifications are for that. And then look at what they say it's based on, and you'll see that it's based on Malak, and Malak has nothing to do with work. It has to do with being a spiritual being, a spiritual messenger.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they don't, all these lexicons on Malak, they're unwilling to say heavenly representative or spiritual messenger. What they say instead is angel. Just to show you the influence here. The influence of Christianity, because the Septuagint translates Malak as agelos, because agelos is the Greek word for messenger. So it's not like the Greeks didn't know that Malak meant messenger. They used the Greek word for messenger, and the nincompoops in Christianity, rather than translate agelos as messenger, they transliterated it as angel.
Mm-hmm.
Lost the meaning.
When they just twisted some more.
Just twisted some more. But that's how people get lost. And the truth is found by being observant. That is by design. God doesn't want the nincompoop who is willing to believe their rabbi making life miserable for us in heaven. So it's just not going to allow it.
I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they were like, well, you go through all this complex stuff, and what about the ordinary person? Now, how does the ordinary person come to know God? And I'm like, no offense, but I honestly don't think God wants a relationship with ordinary people.
That's the whole...
Well, none of us are special, but we're not ordinary. We're willing to put forth the effort to go into this depth and look into it. We're willing to do effort. God wants that. He doesn't want the ordinary person who's just sitting there going, I don't know, tell me what to do.
Yeah, well, first of all, you just proved the point that God has been making. First of all, he likes work. The more work we do in his word,
the more reward we get.
The more we're going to understand, the more we're going to know, the better the relationship's going to be. He is all for work. And second, God is trying to cut out us. Yeah. He wants us separated. It's the Ruach Kodesh, the set-apart spirit. God is trying to, and in fact, he's constantly telling us that he is disassociating from the common. And so you're absolutely right. He doesn't want the common man, the common woman, the average person to spend eternity with it. He wants special people. He wants Kodesh people. And the way that you go from common to Kodesh is by understanding the imperfect, and you stop doing the common and you start doing the uncommon. You stop believing your common religious translation, and you start actually considering the words that God conveyed and their meanings. This is how you go from.
It's not even like it's a lot of work. I mean, there's some effort that is required, but it's not excessive. I mean, it's there to be found. All you have to do is look.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's enough work to be a filterer, to be a sieve, if you will. So there is some work. You've got to put in the effort. And if you don't put in the effort, why would God want to spend time with you? God likes people
the more effort you put into it, the more effort God puts into it. The more he engages you.
We have stories of a lot of people in the Torah. Who are the three people in the Torah that put in the most work?
Moshe certainly did a lot.
Moshe,
Dode,
and
Noah
when you
worked
consider,
like
you look at one of the lives that is detailed, extraordinary life would be Shamuel. Another one who put in enormous amount of work would be Yashaya. But if you consider the work not from the words, but the job that was done, Yosha, right up there. So, God likes work. He likes those who are invested. So, he obviously liked Dode, and boy, that Dode, he was going all the time. And matter of fact, when Dode finally just settled down and stopped working, and it's when his relationship with Yah began to falter.
Yes.
In fact, the worst decision that Dode ever made. Yahweh said, I'm going to give you 3 options here based upon mistakes that you made. Yeah. And Dode said, no, I can't endure it anymore. I can't put in the effort.
I ain't got it.
I don't have it. And it was the worst decision ever made in his life, because he caused others to die because he wasn't willing to put in the work anymore. It's a mistake that he'll never make again. And sometimes, we need to do that. We need to make our mistakes so that we don't repeat them. So, boy, there's a lot to learn here, and we have just started on Kippurim. And it is, it's the most extraordinary day in all time. It is the happiest day for Yahweh of his entire existence, because he's finally reconciling his relationship with his people. The battle is finally over. And he knows that recompense is going to be taken care of, and so we no longer have that burden. He's got no one he needs to yell at anymore. This is the happiest day in all of time for God. And I think there's 5 chapters in it. I mean, they're long chapters too. There's a lot that we can learn, and particularly in the prophetic portrayals as we get into Zechariah, and God sets up Kippurim right from the beginning. He tells us the story of the witnesses, and they are the story of Kippurim. Because without the witnesses, there is no Kippurim. Without what we're doing now, there is no Kippurim. I mean, right now, if you were to total all of the Yehudim, natural-born ethnic Jews who are aware of Yahweh's name, who are aware of the terms and conditions of the covenant, who are aware of his 7 invitations and what they mean, and who are accepting of all of that, you can count them on a few hands. There is no Kippurim unless we do our job. There's no Kippurim without the witnesses. And so Yahweh goes right through it. There is no Kippurim without the blood being sprinkled on the mercy seat.
Mercy seat, yeah.
And there are no priests anymore. So God goes through the process of telling us that he's going to, that's the whole purpose of the story of Yosha in the middle of all of this, is that he is saying, you're right, Yosha and the guys around him, they're terrible. No question. So the only thing we can do is dress him up, and then the person he's dressing up is Dode. So Dode is going to be dressed so that he can act as the priest on our behalf to sprinkle the blood of the goat on the mercy seat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's actually a goat.
Oh, good. Yeah,
the goat in that case. Yeah. So but he's going to have Dode. So that story is in there for that reason. There's so much to it, so many insights as to what's going to happen between now and then. And then, after you deal with everything that Zechariah has to say and everything that Malachi has to say, and then we turn to the last 10 chapters of Yeshayah, and there we are again. And the fact is, if we turn to some of the final chapters of Yirmiyah, where Yah was pleading with his people to come out of Babylon, we're there again. Ezekiel, we're there again. So it's everywhere. This is the day of days. This is the biggest event in the history of time. The Yom Kippurim. And what's interesting is that Yom Kippurim isn't for everybody. I mean, all we are is the troubadours for Yom Kippurim. Mm-hmm. We're writing the sign, holding up the sign, not sparing our voices, trying to get Jews to walk away from Judaism, to disown their politics, to accept the covenant, to answer the invitations for the Moed, to respect and honor Yahweh's name. We're pleading with Jews to do that because Kippurim is this life and death choice for Yisrael and Yehuda. That is what it's for. And even the racial Yehudim that are part of the covenant family now, you're trying to encourage God's people, fellow Yehudim and Israelites, to accept Yahweh. There's a huge part of this is just coming to embrace Yahudah and Yisrael. Jews, by calling themselves Jews and Jewish, have severed their relationship with Yahweh. Yeah. They aren't any longer Yahud and Yahudi. Mm-hmm. But they can be. And second, they aren't Yisrael, at least in the positive sense. There's two potential meanings of Yisrael: those who strive and fight against the Almighty, which they represent beautifully, and, of course, those who engage and endure and are empowered by and freed by God. But it's becoming those things again that makes Kippurim possible. And then once we're reconciled, we can camp out with Yah and Sukkah, and we come full circle back to the Garden of Eden, where, again, there's no government, there's no religion, there's no politics, there's no conspiracies. That's what we're headed towards. So anyway, I want to conclude by saying that if you are a Yehud, and we recorded this message in the beginning of the fall, just after Towrah in 2021, only 12 years left. And you really don't have all of those years because a lot of things are going to happen. We're entering a very dark time. There are going to be horrendous climactic events around the world. It's going to take a lot of lives, change the world as we know it. This pandemic we're in is going to continue, and it's going to get far worse. There's going to be complete economic collapse. There'll be the great reset of currencies that will change the control mechanism of the world beyond which you can even comprehend. Conspiracy is going to continue to stupefy people and become the world's largest religion. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it will continue to be linked to conspiracy. Muslims will be ever more enraged, seeking a genocidal solution for Jews in Israel. Nations are going to force Israel to give up the West Bank, making the nation indefensible. A world war is going to come out of it with Sunni Islam, Europe, and the United States on one side, Shia Islam, which would include Iran and Hezbollah, now Iraq and Syria, along with China and Russia on the other side. Only one out of every 3 Jews is even going to survive to the last days, and there's going to be a higher percentage of Jews spared to the last days than any other race. The time of Jacob's troubles will soon be upon us. It will begin in earnest around 2030. And you're going to have very few lifelines. So if you're listening to this message, act now. Even God says, take advantage of me where I can still be found. Mm-hmm. Approach me where I am still near. As he says, I'm not going to futz with you. He didn't use the term futz, but it's loosely translated as futz. I'm not going to futz with you all that long. I'm tired of futzing with you. And I'm going to withdraw my spirit. And there's no other way to know God other than through his spirit and through his words. And your nasama, your ability to think, it's fading fast. So, if you're listening to this, go to yadayah.com. The whole bookshelf, by the time, hopefully, that you're listening to this, will have an intro to God right there at the beginning. And there's something in that intro to God that I don't think is all that important for Goyim, but it's really important for Yehudim, for Jews. It's essentially two chapters that are why you, why me.
Why me, yeah.
And the why you is that nobody comes to God on their own initiative. God invites those into his family that he wants to spend eternity with. If you're a Goyim, you're going to have something that God really finds interesting for him to reach out to you and to introduce himself so that you can come to know him. But what's amazing about being ethnically Jewish is that you have an open invitation. It's always there. And the rest of it is, why me? Why only communicating through Yisrael, and particularly Yehudim, all of this time? Why did he switch and choose a Nakar, an observant foreigner? Why did he go to a Goyim? Why did he have to stoop so low to awaken his people? And we will systematically, over the course of about 150 pages or so, listen to what God has to say about what it is about these books, Yada Yahweh, these series of books, what it is about these programs that God has specifically endorsed, authorized, inspired, announced in explicit detail. It's because there isn't anything else like it. Because this is your last and best hope. And we hope you listen. We hope you act. We hope you engage. We hope you learn what God is offering and what he expects from you in return. To come to know him by name and accept him by covenant and meet him by mikra, as you are guided by Torah. Well, may Yahweh bless you. We look forward to being with you next Shabbat. Yeah. Gentlemen, we've got a celebration of Yom Kippurim on the horizon, 10 days from whenever you celebrated Towrah. As for me, I celebrated on Wednesday night. You know why? Yeah. Of course, the reason that it's done that way is Towrah is a Shabbaton. And religious Jews don't like the idea of having a natural Shabbat and a Shabbaton be day to day. because it it messes up their lifestyle, because they try to prepare everything so they don't have to do any work, and it's so much work to not do any work when it's over 2 days. So they jury rig it. So there was nothing wrong with celebrating on Tuesday of this week. We celebrated on Wednesday evening was our preference, but whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday, your next invitation to meet with God is 10 days thereafter. So we're in the midst of Yom Kippurim. We may end up doing a full year's of program by the time we finish Kippurim. We may be Kippurim next year.
Maybe Yom Kippurim.
Yeah, we may be. But it's a big deal for Yah, and there's a lot at stake. And while our lives are consumed with Teruah, we only Teruah for Kippurim. So the more we explain Kippurim, the better we're doing Teruah. Right? So,
absolutely.
So we may spend a year Teruahing about Kippurim, and we've got plenty of time to Sukkah.
That's one of those times you can always go to.
It takes care of itself. All right. Happy Shabbat to one and all. Look forward to being with you next week. May Yah bless you all. Good night.
Good night, y'all.
Shalom.